Imagine a secret society that you would find in like video games or movies, but that was actually widespread in the real world, that actually existed. How cool is it that we have all these ritual sites all over the territory of the former Roman Empire, from England to Africa to Spain to the Black Sea, pretty much everywhere where ancient Rome once was. The Cult of Mithras was incredibly popular with the Roman military. You had the generals, but it also spanned the politicians and even the common man. They would gather in secret places in the middle of the forest, in caves, but sometimes they would even gather, sort of hide in plain sight, like very close to the Roman Forum. They participated in unique rituals, they had their own grading and 7-level system and their own ethics. Also, they were a rival to early Christianity, which is ultimately what led to their demise. So, what even was the Cult of Mithras? Who were these guys? What were they up to? And how did they ultimately disappear? So immediately when we say the Cult of Mithras, you're getting like this stigma, you know. Generally when you say cult, you kind of associate it with like crazies, conspiracy theories, human sacrifice, but in all reality, a cult literally just means a subset of worship, and that is exactly what the Cult of Mithras was. It was a subset of worship of the Iranian god Mithra. Now here it gets very vague. We don't actually have concrete evidence, or a lot of concrete evidence, and we don't have many written resources. Most of the written resources are from Christian authors that were criticizing the Cult of Mithras, but what we do have is a ton of these worship places all over the territories of the former Roman Empire. So if you have a place in North England, if you got a place in the Balkans, if you got a place in Africa, and it's kind of the same thing, I mean, you can definitely cross-examine and draw some pretty concrete conclusions out of that. Now, of course, you may be thinking, why are the Romans worshipping Iranian gods all over Europe? And for the longest time, the historians believed that it was the Roman soldiers that brought like this cult all the way from the Far East when they fought, and that is how it spread. I mean, it wouldn't be unheard of an Eastern religion to spread in the Roman Empire. However, from the recent evidence, what is incredibly interesting is that despite a lot of these similarities, this seems to be a strictly Roman religion that is only inspired by Iranian deities, but it is sort of its own thing. It's not really that related. Now, I know this is probably going to sound a little bit ridiculous because you got like hundreds of years of reputable historians discussing this matter and a lot of debates, and this is just a simple YouTube video. This is not a historical debate, so I'm going to try to kind of simplify it to the extreme. Imagine if we here in Serbia just saw like a Greek god Zeus, and then we kind of decided that this guy looks pretty cool, you know, he's throwing lightning bolts, he's kind of big, he's up there with his pantheon and everything, so we just kind of make our own cult with it. We take the name, we take the themes, we kind of modify it a little bit, but it just develops into its own thing, and then over the centuries, it's kind of like completely separate. Well, that is kind of exactly what happened with the Cult of Mithras, as far as we know with the current evidence. The Iranian deity Mithra existed for a really long time. Then we had Mithras as the Hellenized version from the 2nd millennium BCE, but then the Romans came in, they kind of took the name. It is definitely related to the Iranians because their god is wearing Iranian clothes, they're using a few Persian words, they're using zodiac signs, but other than this, it just kind of seems to be its own thing. Like the lore of the Cult of Mithras is just kind of separate. So let us look at what the Cult of Mithras actually was and how it worked. What was this cult? Well, it started in the 1st century CE, and then it kind of gradually disappeared in 5th century CE, and interestingly enough, it started right around the same time as Christianity, and it was considered one of its main rivals, which is ultimately what led to its demise, but we'll get to that in a bit because there's quite a few factors. This wasn't really a religion in the sense that you would imagine a religion. This was more like a secret society. Think of it something like the stonemasons. This was an initiation cult, and you had to go through a few rites to even get into this club, and you also had to do a few rites to be able to advance in the ranks. It had a series of levels and grades. As far as we know, it had 7 levels. It started from Raven, it ended up with Father, and we don't really know how they they advanced through a lot of these ranks and whether even everyone could be able to advance to the most upper echelon of this society. By all the evidence, it was very likely a strictly male religion, and it was incredibly popular with the Roman military. They had a lot of members from generals to the common soldiers, but also a lot of politicians, merchants, and even slaves were a part of this society, of this religion. However, of course, don't get it wrong, this was not some utopian equality society where everyone was like the best buddies, like the slave was the best buddies with the generals. It is very likely that the status played a big role in your advancement in this society, so the status outside of the Cult of Mithras probably played a role in the Cult of Mithras. Now this here is the most interesting part. So we essentially have two main bits of evidence or archaeological evidence of how we learned what this place was. We have a lot of sculptures of the god Mithras, and we had Mithraisms, which were places where they could gather. The sculptures of Mithras almost always featured, of course, the god of Mithras, sometimes rising from stone, but almost always he was slaying the bull, and usually he would look away when he was killing the bull, which brings a lot of speculations to what the symbolism of this means. Sometimes he had a dog, sometimes he had a scorpion, sometimes there was a raven. Additionally, zodiac signs were present, which means that this definitely was inspired by Iranian religion. However, what is really interesting is that this culture was very similar even in Africa, even in England, even in near the Black Sea, so obviously something was going on, and despite this sacrificial imagery, like you're always killing the bull, you would imagine this was like some human sacrifice cult. As far as we know, there is no actual evidence that they ever sacrificed anything in this cult. I may be thinking we're getting a little bit abstract here. What even was this cult? What was the point of this cult? What were they even doing? Now, interesting enough, the other bit of archaeological evidence is that we have discovered like hundreds of these Mithraisms, which is the name for the places of worship, not really worship, but like the places where they had gathered. Almost always they were underground, in a cave, in some formation, sometimes even under a wall, and they were around 10 meters long, and they housed about a few dozen members, and if there were a lot of people, they would sometimes be sent to another location. It is believed that their rites could only happen within these places, which is why there were so many of them. Additionally, another point is that the military was a big factor in this cult. As I said, it was very popular with the Roman military, and as we know, when you're a soldier, when you're a legion, you're always traveling, especially near the edges of the empire, so that is why we find a lot of these Mithraisms near the actual borders, the frontiers of the former Roman Empire. As I just stated, this secretive part is that they almost always gathered somehow underground or in some sort of a hidden place. Usually it was a cave, sometimes in the forest, sometimes they would build like buildings under the ground, and in some places we can actually discover one under the wall in England. But very interesting enough, sometimes they were like half hidden and you could find like something in the Roman baths, so it isn't really clear how secret this society really was. Ritual meals were a pretty big deal within the Cult of Mithras, and it is really one of the main reasons why they had gathered in the first place. They had their own code of conduct, they had their own ideas about ethics, and they called themselves, in a Roman name, United by Handshake, which means that a handshake was a pretty important factor within their cult. Now, the most interesting part is, despite the fact that it was called a mystery cult, it is uncertain how mysterious actually was. You need to keep in mind, as you can see, the Roman Empire was a pretty large place, so it wasn't really the same in all of them, and rituals were completely different probably in other places, but we have actually discovered a few Mithraisms in Rome, in very public places, near the public baths, near the forum, so it is very likely that the public knew about these places, but as far as we know, the secrets, like the secrets that were a part of this, were like the inner workings and the rituals that were happening within the Cult of Mithras. Based on the evidence, seeing how widespread this religion was, you may be thinking, how is it that we don't have the Cult of Mithras today, and why is it that they completely disappeared from history in like the 5th century CE. Of course, as with all history, you can never really pinpoint one single reason why something happened, but we do have a few factors that the historians have been talking about, and one of the largest factors is really Christianity. Christianity started pretty much around the same time as the Cult of Mithras, and they were direct rivals. There were occasions when they worked together, there was some syncretism, but usually they didn't really like them, as we have seen. Most of the written evidence is from Christian authors, and they had completely demonized this cult. We even found evidence of Christian graffiti within former Mithraisms, and we have also found evidence of Christians destroying these places. They have destroyed sculptures, and interestingly enough, they have also built churches on top of them, which means that one of the main reasons was that Christianity simply eradicated their rival. Of course, it isn't just a single factor. When the barbarian tribes had arrived, they had also destroyed a lot of these places, but here is the most interesting part. We had actually discovered Mithraisms all over Europe that were abandoned. They were completely intact for centuries, and you may be wondering, like, what exactly happened here? Well, once again, Christianity plays a pretty big role. You need to keep in mind, as Christianity spread, it wasn't just the power, it was the fact that they had managed to convert the people, and eventually people became more interested in Christianity than they became interested in the Cult of Mithras. Furthermore, Cult of Mithras was not really built to become a worldwide religion. They just didn't have the platform, they didn't have the infrastructure for something like this. As I said, they were a secretive society with initiation and rituals, and that wasn't exactly the best practice when you were fighting with numbers with the Christians. I mean, the Christians just completely overwhelmed them with like religious convert numbers. Just think about it. As I said, Mithraism is really more like a secret lodge than it is an organized religion. It was male only, so that obviously isolated a large part of society. Additionally, the Christians just completely demonized them in like the literal sense of the word. And also when the Western Roman Empire, as you may know, like the culture was definitely impacted by it, and the Cult of Mithras was mainly just a Roman thing, so it also kind of disappeared with that as well. However, what I find so incredibly interesting about this is that this happened like 1500 years ago, but there's like a map of hundreds of these places that you can track down, especially if they are near you, so you can actually visit some of these places and you can discover a secret Roman society that once existed. Thanks for watching. Check out my video on ancient Greek colonies in Spain by clicking on the screen, and subscribe to the channel for more videos. See you next time.